Hello, everyone. This is Randy here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. And today I am going to talk about different types of relationships, and specifically how moving between different types of relationships and categories of relationships can sometimes better the relationship, or sometimes it could actually make it worse, or perhaps destroy the relationship altogether. So let me explain first of all what I mean by different types of relationships. There are obviously many different categories of relationships, but I'm going to characterize five large groups for the purposes of today's conversation. We have friendships, romantic relationships, commercial relationships, legal-socio relationships, and then familial relationships, relationships based on family. Okay, so let me explain each of these categories in order to give you some greater insight into what I mean. All right, so let's start with friendships. Well, you know what? Actually, let's go back. Let's start with familial relationships because that, in one way, is the first type of relationship, right? Even before you make friends in life, you presumably have family because you were born from from somebody, right? Unless you were born from a test tube, you were born from somebody. I believe it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau who said that families were the first societies, right? Families were the first societies before societies became societies, these large conglomerates of people and rules. Families were the first societies. And if you think about that, that makes sense. In older tribal societies, if you were to trace the history of humanity through anthropological findings, that the earliest groups of people were families, right? Families and maybe extended families. That was the basis of a community, the basis of a village, the basis of a tribe, were close-knit families. So in fact, I believe Jean-Jacques Rousseau was correct when he states that families were the first society. So familial relationships are perhaps the first type of relationship that any human being has with anybody in the world, right? Relationship with mom and dad, or at least if dad is not there, relationship with mom. Now, this is assuming that the parents are present. There are certainly obviously cases where parents die or parents abandon their children. There are outliers and different scenarios and examples, but generally speaking, most human beings have a relationship with mom and dad, or at the very least with mom. So those are familial relationships, and obviously there's extensions of that, relationships with one's grandparents, relationships with one's siblings. Now, personally, I'm an only child, so I've never had the the privilege. Some people would say it's a privilege. Some people would not say it's a privilege. But I've never had a relationship with a sibling, not at least not with a brother or sister. But I hear those relationships do exist. So you can have relationships with brothers and sisters. Obviously, your relationship with your own children. Again, I don't yet have children in my life, so I have yet to experience that from a personal perspective. But I hear that it's possible to have children, and those types of relationships, relationships of blood, if you will, and then by way of extension, extended family, right? Cousins, uncles, aunts. Now, the key point to these types of familial relationships is that these relationships are not by choice. You cannot choose who your mom or dad are. You have no choice in this matter, or your grandparents, or by most in most situations. I can't imagine that you would be able to choose who your siblings are. I can imagine some very bizarre scenarios where maybe you can perhaps advocate for particular siblings to exist or not exist with your parents if you're the first child. But in a normal situation, you can't really choose who your siblings are, and in normal situations outside of designer babies and I guess aborting children, you can't really choose who your children are, right? I guess you could have some choice over whether your children exist or not. But generally speaking, relationships of blood are relationships where you have very little choice, and that has, of course, profound implications. Because when you have a relationship where you don't have a certain amount of choice, then in a way, unless you become estranged, you are stuck with these people, and that could be a very good thing, right? There's family relationships that last for an entire lifetime. When they're good, they're the cornerstone of being human. When they're bad, then you write sad lyrics and you become a musician. So we have familial relationships. We have then I think the next type of relationships that humans naturally develop are friendships. You think of friendships developing in the course of elementary school, kindergarten, right? Once you're out in the world, you're developing friendships even as a small child. So the second form of relationships would be friendships. Now, friendships are based on certain factors. I would define these factors as being some level of mutual respect, and some level of mutual trust, and some level of mutual interest. So you can't be a friend with someone who, not truly, right? You can get into other different types of relationships with them later on in life, and I would go into those categories: commercial relationships and legal-social relationships. But you can't really have a true friendship with someone if there's not some level of respect for the other person, some level of trust for the other person, and some level of interest, that you have some shared interests. If you have no shared interests whatsoever, they become an acquaintance, right? They're not really a friend. Maybe you rely on them because of some social situation or social obligation, but they're not truly your friend. So interest is important, trust is important, right? I would imagine that if you have friends, you trust them, right? These are people that you confide in. These are people you rely on. They rely on you. These are people who you rely on advice and help, that you have some trust, and of course respect. So these are the big broad categories. I'm sure there are many more, but I'm generalizing in terms of the broad categories. Now, friendships are relationships of choice. Now, you can choose who your friends are, generally speaking. Again, there may be situations where you can't choose. There's situations for everyone where early on in life, your parents give you little play dates, right? They force you to be with certain people. So that's an example where you may not have some direct choice over who you're hanging out with, but certainly later on in life, you don't have to see them again if you don't like them. So as an adult, you certainly, maybe as a child, there's a lack of control over who you're exposed to, but as a fully functional adult, you absolutely have choice over your friends. Now, it actually becomes harder to meet friends as an adult for various reasons, especially after school. By school, I mean after university. It becomes harder to build that level of trust, respect, and interest for all types of reasons. People have children, so they lose a lot of their social circle. Once you're in a workplace, you develop a completely different type of relationships with different people that are not necessarily based on friendships. The workplace and the world becomes more competitive. There are now more commercial and legal-social relationships that you have that are not based on interest, trust, and respect, but based on legal parameters, based on commercial interests, based on societal obligations. So the number of people you're having these sort of pure friendships with, that decreases. Now, I'm sure you've noticed that in your own life, that it's harder for a lot of people to make friends past a certain age, right? In university and in high school, it's easier to make friends. You're on the same track. Everybody has more or less the same interests. It's just to graduate. or to have a good time and study or develop as a person. But more or less, everyone's on the same track. You're not too worried about your own survival. Mom and dad are taking care of you. You're not in the workforce yet. You don't have these power dynamics with your boss. So it's easier, and plus you have a larger group of people, right? Through institutionalized learning, through the school system, high school, university, and these sort of institutionalized learning platforms. You have more exposure to people your age, and a lot of them. So it's easier to pick and choose people your age who you develop trust, respect, and a mutual interest for. So it's easier to make friends. That actually becomes harder. But friendships are a very pure form of relationship at its core, because they're based on these higher virtues. I believe it's one of the three big Greek philosophers, either Plato, Aristotle, or Socrates. I'm thinking Plato. Don't quote me on this. I think Plato actually says that friendship is the highest form of relationship because of these virtues. And I may not be using Plato's words, but the similar concepts that I'm expressing today of trust, respect, mutual interest. These are very pure relationships, and he places these relationships at the highest pedestal in terms of the type of relationships we can have as human beings, because of how pure they are. They're relationships of choice, they're relationships of respect, they're relationships where there are elements of all of these things that Plato determines to be very high virtues in one's life, according to this ancient Greek philosopher. So we have friendships, and then we have romantic relationships, obviously, right? So if we're following the trajectory of a person's life, you're born, you have mom and dad, you meet friends in school, you meet friends in the course of existing in your community, and then eventually you start to have an interest in the opposite sex. So if or the same sex. So you start to have romantic interests in other people. That goes beyond friendships, right? That's beyond, hey, let's just hang out, but a more intimate interest that for most people eventually results in a romantic relationship, sexual intercourse. It's intimate, it's sexualized, and that's the basis, at least for a heterosexual couple, for families in the future, right? A romantic relationship then forms the basis of a family, and that creates more familial relationships in the future, more children, siblings, the siblings of the children. And that's the genesis of the familial structure. The family structure is the romantic relationship. Without romantic relationships, you can't have families. Friends usually don't raise children together. They can in communal societies. You certainly can, and I'm sure there are anthropological examples where communities raise kids collectively, or perhaps it's imposed by some social structure that you're raising children collectively. But in most societies that I'm aware of, children are raised by families, by individual families. They're not raised collectively by friends or by societies or by religious institutions. They're raised by individual families. They're raised by generally mom and dad, right? And mom and dad had to fall in love at some point, or maybe not necessarily fall in love, but they had to at least have sexual intercourse. So there was at least some level of intimacy in this. We're assuming, of course, that everything was consensual. There are circumstances where, right, of course, sexual intercourse is not consensual. We're discounting sort of those examples, but generally speaking, we're talking about consensual sexual intercourse, consensual intimacy resulting in family. Now, of course, in our modern era, not all romantic relationships result in family, and not all partners in romantic relationships want family. But traditionally, children was not a choice, right? Prior to the invention of the birth control pill, of condoms, of contraceptives, children was not a choice. We live in a miraculous society where children have become a choice, that you can choose not to have children through birth control, condoms, contraceptives, abortion to a certain extent. people, families, men and women can choose to prevent pregnancy and can choose to intervene with the outcome of pregnancy. But for the longest time in history, that was not possible. Now just pause and reflect on that for a second. For the longest time in human history, that was not possible. You could not prevent pregnancy in the same way. There were obviously, I'm sure, certain techniques that people use to mitigate pregnancy or prevent pregnancy, but not in the same way that we can today through the use of the technology available to us. So for most of human history, pregnancy was involuntary. In that, as a result of sexual intercourse, pregnancy just happened, and children happened. So we live in a very interesting world where we have couples and people who are engaging in dating, intimacy, romance, who can choose not to have children, right? Actively choose. In the past, that choice would have been greatly curtailed, or for a lot of people was not a choice at all. It's something that happened to you. So our romantic relationships certainly look different from the romantic relationships in the past. And that's had profound implications in terms of dating, in terms of finding one's partner, in terms of expectations. That's had a profound impact on family structure, on social structure, some of which I'm not going to get into today because it's a different topic. But certainly our romantic relationships look very different from the past. But we have, of course, we have the romantic relationships. People engage in intimacy, they engage in sex, and romantic relationships happen. So that's a third category of relationships that I'm sure all of you are aware of, all of you watching this video. Now, then I'm going to talk about commercial relationships and legal-social relationships. Commercial relationships are those relationships based on commerce, based on buying and selling things, right? If you have some type of service provider, right? Someone who cuts your hair, and that's a commercial relationship, right? Your hairdresser, your server at the restaurant. That's a commercial relationship. You've walked into a restaurant, a commercial establishment, and you're paying for a service. Your stock advisor, your lawyer, your doctor, to a certain extent, these are commercial relationships. Although for certain types of services, it goes into more the legal-social relationship. For example, your relationship with the government, your relationship with police officers, firefighters, which are sort of non-commercial because you're not directly paying them, although you are indirectly paying them through your tax dollars, and tax dollars go into the pool of government resources that are then reallocated to different services in society. So in effect, you are, but they're not seen directly as commercial relationships because they sort of follow a roundabout path. But there are direct commercial relationships that you have on a day-to-day basis. Your relationship with a shopkeeper, like you're buying something. Your relationship with your real estate agent. There are many commercial relationships. Some of them very, very short relationships, and some of them long-term relationships. You may have a long-term relationship with your cleaner, right? With your plumber, with your electrician. You're not friends with your electrician. You're certainly not family with your electrician. They're not part of your family, and maybe, hopefully, you're not also having sex with your electrician. But these are commercial relationships that are happening, right? You're paying your electrician to fix the lights. So these are commercial relationships, usually based on service, but also based on the payment of money for goods, right? So we're talking about shopping for items and consumer goods. So there are commercial relationships, both large and small. We now live in a knowledge economy that's predominantly based on service. So most of the commercial relationships that you would recognize, at least on a day-to-day basis, would probably be service-based commercial relationships. That's all around us. The moment you're paying for something, a service, whether it's an electronic service or a real world service, and there is some real person on the other end, there is some level of relationship. Now, they may not be very good relationships, or you may not even see them as being relationships, but they are relationships, and there are rules around commercial relationships, right? Certainly, you can be a bit more adversarial in commercial relationships in terms of haggling for a discount or perhaps being upset at someone in a commercial setting that is almost sometimes expected or at least condoned if you're haggling or negotiating, and that may not be as kosher, if you will, in a friendship if you're screaming at your friend. But if you're screaming at your local internet provider, it's almost expected. I mean, the service is shit, right? Or certain airlines, I mean, it's almost expected that you be screaming at certain flight attendants. Not that I'm condoning it, but you know what I mean, right? It's a relationship of a commercial. It's a commercial relationship. It's based on money, and as the consumer, you want the best bang for your buck. And as a service provider, often they're trying to provide you with the least amount of service or the least amount of value for the greatest amount of money, because they make more money that way. So there are these strange dynamics that happen in the course of commercial relationships. And then the last category, legal-social relationships, right? So we're talking about relationships that are not necessarily based on commerce, but based on some type of mutual obligation or some type of obligation. So workplaces, I would define those as legal-social relationships. Like in a workplace, and you have other people who work in the same workplace, you have a relationship with these people. They're not necessarily commercial. You're not necessarily paying them to do things for you, or they're paying you to do things for them. You're collecting a salary, right, from the company. So the individuals who you're working with, you don't have a direct commercial relationship with them, but you do have some type of legal social relationship with them, right? There are workplace laws that govern how you should behave around them. There are social relationships. You go to events, recreational events, or after work, and some of these relationships can even blossom into friendships. Or in certain circumstances into romantic relationships, although you do have to be careful with that. I'm going to talk about that later on in this video, because you could run into an HR issue if you are having sex with your boss or if you are having sex with your coworkers. But generally these are legal social relationships, right? They're a relationship based on the fact that you're in the same community, if you will, and you're part of this overarching institution, whether that's the workplace, whether that's a church. Suppose you go to the same church as many other members of the same church, you begin to develop a legal social relationship with those members of the church. Now, it may not be so much on the legal side, more on the social side, that you may not be friends with these people who go to the same church, but you have a certain type of relationship with them. They're part of the same community. They have the same belief system, more or less. So you have a certain relationship with them. Some of them may become your friends. Some of them may not be your friends. Some of them you may not like, but you have some social relationship with them. In a community, it's the same thing. You have certain legal social relationships with people in your community. However, you meet those people, right? Generally, in the past, it was through some religious institutions, through a church, or in our modern era, it could be some civic endeavor, a volunteer program, a political party, any of these club. I would consider that sort of a legal social platform where you're meeting people who have some level of the similar interest as you, and you're in obviously a space where there is some relationship that is formed, but it doesn't arise to the point of friendship. So those are sort of legal social relationships. There are obviously also relationships dictated by law, right? That you're forced into certain relationships through legal means, or your relationships with certain government officials, for example, is a legal relationship, right? If some tax revenue person or some government bureaucrat is calling you for information, or you need to complete something for legal purposes, that's a legal relationship, right? You're not friends with them. They're not family. You're certainly not having sex with these people, and it's not a relationship of money, but it's a relationship, right? It may not be a very good relationship with a bureaucrat, but you're having a relationship with a bureaucrat, and that's a legal relationship. You may, as a citizen living in a particular jurisdiction, have a legal obligation to do X, whatever X is. right? File your annual report for something, do something that is legally required on your property, whatever it is that you must fulfill as part of a human being living within the society. So a lot of people actually spend a lot of time in these sort of legal relationships. Unfortunately, if you're being if a bureaucrat requires that you do something, you may spend a lot of time on the phone with this bureaucrat. You may not like this relationship, but it is a relationship, and that relationship follows a certain rule, and unfortunately a certain power dynamic as well. So those are the types of relationships that are more on the legal side rather than on the social side. So I put them in the same category as legal-social, but it exists on a spectrum, right? One, very legal, which is you have very little choice, and it's imposed on you. On the other side of the spectrum, social, where you have more choice, and you can vote with your feet, if you will. A great example of a legal-social relationship on the very extreme end, on the legal side, is if you're in prison, right? You have a relationship with a prison guard. Right? That's a relationship. It's not a very good relationship, and it's a legal relationship in that the guard is trying to prevent you from leaving. So that's a legal-social relationship. Another example where a legal-social relationship exists is if you're part of the military, right? You have a certain relationship with your comrades who are part of the military, and then you have certain legal relationships with your superiors, right? So depending on which jurisdiction you're in and which country you're in, if you don't fulfill those obligations, they can shoot you, right? Or court-martial you, or label you as a deserter, which may also result in you being shot, depending again on where you are in the world. The military law is different from civilian law. So you have this relationship with your general, with your sergeant, which is more on the legal side, and perhaps a social relationship with your comrades who are more on the horizontal level to you. So again, 5 big categories. If I were to summarize, we have the familial relationships, the relationship based on blood, the family relationships. We have friendships, romantic relationships, commercial relationships, and then legal-social relationships. So these are the big 5. I'm sure there are other types of relationships in the world that can exist, but I'm just broadly speaking saying that there are these 5 categories. Now, that being said, it gets really interesting once you move between the categories. This is where the interesting thing happens. When you're moving between recognized categories, either things can go really well or things can explode in your face. So a really common one is moving from one of the 4 other categories into a romantic relationship, right? So let's explore this. Let's have a little thought experiment. I think the most common example is moving from friendship to relationship. All right, you're friends with someone. Suddenly you feel that you want to be more than friends, right? Isn't this the topic of every romantic song? I want to be more than friends. I'm a bad singer. Please don't please don't judge me on that. So you want to be more than friends, and that's kind of romantic, right? You move from a friendship to a romantic relationship. That's romantic. Now, in many cases, it fails. In many cases, you start as friends, you move to a romantic relationship, it fails. What happens? Well, then you often can't remain as friends. Unfortunately, that's just the reality, the brutal reality of moving between categories, because these are categories for a reason. Once you're jumping categories, the expectations are different, the emotions are different, and a lot of people who started as friends, they go into a romantic relationship that fails. They can't be friends anymore. Similarly, there are people who start out in a romantic relationship, right? So it's through dating, and they were never friends. And sometimes if that relationship fails, they become friends, which is great, right? So you've actually moved from romantic relationship to friendship, right? So you've moved the other way. So that's sort of the most socially recognized example. Now, can you have a romantic relationship that arises from commercial relationship? Sometimes. I remember the late Italian prime minister or president. I don't remember what he was, whether the president or the prime minister, but the late Silvio Berlusconi, who was very well known as being a roguish character, a little bit of a, well, not a little bit, a huge playboy, well known for his love of women and his collection of women from all different parts of Europe and of the world. He managed to get into a relationship, I think, with his dental hygienist at one point, right? He just completely fell in love with his dental hygienist and then seduced her. But that was a commercial relationship, right? The dental hygienist was being paid to clean his teeth, and I guess eventually started sleeping with him. So that's just an example I can think of. I'm sure there are many examples where people fall in love with some service provider, maybe a waitress, for example. You know, the waitress is serving you at one point and then serving you in a different way in a couple months, right? So that's an example of a commercial relationship, and there are many other examples. I'm sure you can make up your own. Legal-Socio relationships. On the social side, absolutely. If you're in the same community, in the same church as someone, that could easily turn into a romantic relationship. In the same workplace, you have to be careful with that. A lot of romances do arise in the workplace because you are in close proximity. There are so many examples. I don't even have to give you examples of this, of romantic relationship arising in the workplace and also failing. Right, the former mayor of Toronto, John Tory, he was well known to have had a workplace affair, and that blew up in his face. And I think the most famous one, come on, the man himself, Bill Clinton, right? Workplace affair with Monica Lewinsky. That's probably the most famous workplace relationship where there was a legal-social relationship that turned into a romantic relationship that almost resulted in the impeachment of Mr. Clinton, the former president of the United States. So that's a very famous workplace relationship gone wrong. And of course, as an employment lawyer, I see workplace relationships gone wrong all the time. I get calls on a daily basis of people who stepped over the line and had a romantic relationship with a coworker, with a boss, with someone working under them. And it inevitably, most of the times, they blow up. Sometimes they end up in marriage, and sometimes you get these great romantic stories. But often they end up in disaster because, again, you're skipping categories, right? You're moving from one category to the next. And when you're moving from one category to the next, it's dangerous when you're doing that, because now the expectations are different, the emotions are different, the framework is now different. It's very different moving from like co-workers to a romantic relationship versus starting in a romantic relationship. Say you found someone through an online dating site. That was the expectation, right? You're dating. But co-workers, you're working together, especially if there's a power dynamic, right? Especially if it's boss and secretary, that type of thing. Ooh, that gets really tricky. Of course, there's the final category, moving from family to romantic relationships. I don't want to describe that too much, otherwise I'm going to get demonetized by YouTube. But you can imagine that most societies do not encourage moving from family as a category to romantic relationship. There's a word for that, and that's called incest. And most societies that I've ever encountered or that I know of do not encourage incest. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it today. If this topic of incest interests you, I'm sure there are many corners of the internet that you can go to and satisfy your fantasies. Okay, so those are sort of categories moving into romantic relationships. But in my personal experience, that's not the only thing that happens. I've often found it's actually quite tricky sometimes to move from commercial relationships to friendships and friendships to commercial relationships, and where you have this intersection between the two. I find it difficult, at least in my own personal experience. I'll give you a couple examples. I've had friends who end up working for, different financial companies. Investors Group is a notoriously bad one, where they just try to solicit you, right? They suddenly work for as financial advisors, and you're friends, but they're trying to sell you insurance products all of a sudden, and then you're seen as a client. Some people who are real estate agents who you're friends with, then they become very solicitation focused, right? They're trying to solicit you. I've always found that a little bit off-putting and a little bit upsetting, actually, when your friends then eventually see you not as a friend anymore, but as a potential client. Um, I've always struggled with that. In one sense, you want to help them with their business venture, but at the same time, you're friends, right? Remember, a friendship is based on mutual respect, trust, and mutual interest, not based on you buying something from someone else. So historically, where some of my friends, and luckily it hasn't been a large group of them, but when they become insurance salespeople, advisors, or they get into that realm, they tend to solicit everybody in their social circle, friend and foe alike, and that becomes actually quite problematic. So I've actually managed to lose some friends that way, not because that I wanted to lose the friend, but because they've just turned into salespeople. And it's like I don't want to be in a relationship with a salesperson, right? Like I'm here to be your friend. I'm not here to buy shit from you. So unfortunately, I've lost some friends over the course of my life that way. Not many, but some people have. That's happened. And I had one friend who was a very good friend who now ignores me because I didn't buy something from him, and I think that friendship fizzled because I didn't end up buying, and I think he got upset or got passive aggressive, which is unfortunate, right? But then, what does that mean for our friendship, right? If you see me as a client rather than a friend, or as a customer, how good was our friendship to begin with? And maybe I had more naive assumptions of that person. So that's tricky. Now, this is maybe unique to me, but I've also sometimes struggled when I'm the service provider. Now, I don't solicit people, but as a lawyer, sometimes people come to me and they want me to be their lawyer. And I've struggled with that because I do want to help out my friends, but then we enter into some type of commercial relationship, or it turns into more of a legal-social relationship. And I've struggled with that because I want to maintain the friendship. But as a lawyer, I have certain obligations, and sometimes I need to tell you, you have a shit case, or you shouldn't do this. Here's my legal advice. I need to put my legal hat on, and that may be contrary to my good graces as a friend. I may be expressing myself very differently to you as a friend than as a lawyer. I may have to be more strict with you, or more forthright, or more controlling, and I don't like that. So that's a struggle I've had, so I'm sort of the go-to employment lawyer for my circle of friends, and sometimes when I become their lawyer, I struggle a bit in terms of how to balance friendship with my performances of my duties as a lawyer, because I also have social legal obligations to the law society, to the legal profession, to society as large. As a lawyer, right, I have my own obligations. So how do I balance that, right? It's a struggle. I generally don't like representing friends for that reason as their lawyer. Sometimes I end up doing it because I want to help people out. But there is that struggle that I have, which puts me sometimes, not always. Sometimes when I represent a friend, it goes very smoothly and nothing happens. But I've had instances where I've struggled a bit. I've had instances where I've had to give massive discounts to friends because I wanted to help them out, so I wasn't charging my normal rates. Or I would be taking on cases that I probably normally would not take on just to assist someone. So that's for my own reflection. I need to reflect on that, and I need to create some level of balance that is good for me. I've had good success stories where I've managed to assist a friend in a meaningful way, and perhaps that's even deepened our friendship in some way. There was one case where I helped my father in a legal case after he got into a car accident, and I thought that actually deepened our relationship when I assisted my father, but that was on a pro bono basis, right? I wasn't charging him anything for that. I was doing it as a son, but I thought that was actually a very good experience for me and for my father, to get him a chunk of money after a car accident. But yeah, that's my thoughts there in terms of moving from friendship to commercial relationships, or moving back and forth from friendship to legal social relationships. Now, I personally don't do this, but there are people who do this. I don't recommend it. I think it's sleazy. But there are people who are in romantic relationships, and then they try to convert them into commercial relationships. I know people who've dated, for example, men who've dated women, then try to sell them something, whatever they're selling, a course, a seminar, a product, a service. An insurance policy, real estate services, whatever. I call that double dipping, right? You're already dating the girl. You're getting sex. You're getting intimacy, and you're trying to sell her something on top of that. Like, oh my God, that just sounds evil. But I know people who do that. I've never done that in my life. If anything, what tends to happen is some of the never mind. But I've never tried that at all. I think it's really unethical to to do that. But I know people who try to double dip, right? They try to integrate some level of commercial relationship into their romantic relationship. I don't advise it. Look, if you really need the money, then I guess go ahead, do it. It's your life. But yeah, when I hear that, it makes my skull, makes my skin crawl. But these are just things to think about in terms of moving from different relationships, right? Commercial relationships and family relationships. Ooh, that's a really difficult one, right? When you try to do business with your family members, and if that fails, that could ruin the family relationship, right? You hear stories of brothers and siblings, sisters, or parents and children, going to business, and the business fails. Maybe I see more of this as a lawyer, but when you're traversing through categories, when you have a family relationship and you do business, and if the business does well, everybody's happy. Well, or maybe not, because when the business is well, everybody's fighting for the money. So I've seen a lot of that as a lawyer, where families get torn apart because they do business together. I'm sure again there are great examples of families that do business together and they become a family empire, right? You think of some traditional family empires with generational wealth, and the family is part of the same business, and they have a good system in place. You think of these big rich families, the Rothschilds, Rockefellers. You hear these names of big aristocratic families, and obviously they're part of some large business enterprise, and they've managed to succeed where family members are doing business. But then you hear opposite stories, right? Of brothers. I think there was a famous two brothers in India. I forgot their names. Was it the Abanis or something like that? Don't quote me on this, but I remember there was two brothers in India who did really well. They became billionaires, and there was a falling out between these two brothers, and it sort of ruined the family dynamic, and it ruined their relationship. Once they had different interests and different sense of direction. Inevitably, in business, sometimes there's hard times and failure, and when you're doing business with family members, it can, if you don't have a lot of this stuff in place, it can be bad. There are good success stories, right? Jeff Bezos, when he started Amazon, he approached a lot of family and friends, and a lot of the family and friends who invested with him became billionaires now with Amazon stock. But he specifically said to his family and friends, by the way, if this fails, I still want to be invited to Thanksgiving dinner, right? I think that was an exact quote from Jeff Bezos. I still want to be invited to Thanksgiving dinner. I don't want you to hate me in case my venture fails, and it didn't. It was wildly successful. But in case it fails, I still want to be invited to Christmas, to Thanksgiving, right? I still want to be part of the family. Don't ostracize me if my business venture fails. So I think you need to set those expectations. If you're going to do business with family members or even with friends, I think the expectation needs to be set that, hey, this is business. There's a chance of failure. There's a chance we all make money, but there's a chance of failure. If it fails, I'm telling you right now, right? I still want to be your friend. I still want to be part of the family. Now, once emotions get involved, once money gets involved, even that disclosure and that disclaimer may not be enough. So be careful when you are engaging in business with family members. Actually, Warren Buffett says the number one most important choice in life is who you marry, and number two important choice, the second most important choice you can make in life is who you go into business with. So be wary and be mindful at the very least of going to business with friends or family members. I remember, this is a little bit different, but I remember in my first year at McMaster, one of the residents, Dons, said to me that being friends with someone is great, but being roommates with that same person may not necessarily be the best, right? It's the same idea in a way, that you can be really good friends with someone, but once they're a roommate, the expectation changes. Do they clean? Do they have the same interests as you when it comes to sleeping and when they sleep? Do they drink? Do they not drink? Right? You may be really good friends, but terrible roommates. Or you may be really good roommates and the two of you have the same schedule and you have the same level of cleanliness and the same expectation with respect to guests, but you may not be friends. So the two are different types of relationships, and two may not mesh, right? So good friends may not make good roommates. Good roommates may not make good friends. In the same way that good business partners may not make good friends, and good friends may not make good business partners. So again, when you're going across categories into business with someone, you do have to be mindful. I'm sure there are many other examples that I can raise with respect to traversing through different categories, but think about it, right? Think about your friendships in life. What category do they fall in? Should they be in a different category? Are they moving towards a different category? And if they do, if you fail within that category, what are the consequences? And if you have some active control over where you move a particular relationship or where that relationship is moving, maybe you want to think a little bit about where that relationship is moving. Should that friendship become a relationship? Should that, should you do business with your family members? These types of questions, right? Because you're moving from category to category. So be cognizant of that. Be aware when you're moving categories. I've become a bit more aware, actively aware when categories are shifting, and if I like the shift, I will, maybe embrace it. If I don't like the shift, I think I'm a bit more active. For example, in my personal life recently, I've rejected some invitations to provide legal services from friends because I just didn't think it would work out for me to be that person's lawyer. So I've had to politely say, like, as your friend, I actually can't represent you. In the past, I would have done it just as feeling through a feeling of obligation as a friend, but nowadays I'm a bit more careful with it. And I think that's actually better for the relationship. I think that actually preserves the friendship when you're a bit more mindful of what category that particular relationship is going towards, and whether you just want to preserve it where it is, right? Certain categories and certain relationships should just really should be within that category. It shouldn't move. So you're in that category for a reason, right? That relationship exists within that category for a reason. You shouldn't be dating all of the waitresses and doing business with all of your girlfriends, right? Like, it's just like there's a relationship. It exists for a reason, and that's probably the most natural orientation for that type of relationship. So for you to move it, or for other people to want to move it, think twice. Think twice about the categories. Think twice about the implications of that move, and you will have better relationships that way. This is Randy I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like more videos of this type, please do not forget to like and subscribe for my weekly and perhaps sometimes daily philosophical musings on different aspects of life. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and I hope this video made your day just a little bit better. And until next time, talk to you soon.